I remember I was living in a multi-family house with 7 other families. Not sure how common this is everywhere else, but it's very common in some of the expensive urban areas of New England. This was in a tough city, but for the streets itself, they were pretty quiet and is mostly filled with kids and families. When I moved in, the 2 floors above me were vacant and a couple of small children lived below me. A single guy moved into the unit above mine. He seemed pretty nice. He was a quiet neighbour. We'd say hi to each other when passing though. He would leave early in the morning and come back late at night. I worked 9 to 5, so I lost a good chunk of my day as well. However, after about 5 months, a young couple moved into the 3rd floor unit. Things started to change immediately. Trash started getting left in the entryway and porch. Strange people started coming and going into the home at all hours of the day and night, always going up to and coming back from the 3rd floor. I never saw the guy much after that either, or would hear much from the woman. The manner which she spoke led me to believe that she was either a heavy drug user or just hyperactive. One night, a woman was screaming bloody murder upstairs. I'd hear a loud thump and then she'd scream again. I've never once called the police in my life, but I dialed 911 as I seriously believed that this woman was being harmed. So 3 police officers showed up a few minutes later. I let them take care of it. I didn't pay much attention after that, except noticing that the police left without arresting anyone. At a later date, I heard the guy from the 3rd floor right outside my door having a conversation about selling cocaine. I guess that explains the odd hours. Fast forward some weeks and I can hear a knock at the front door of the home at around 5 AM. I look through the blinds and see 2 men and a woman with vests that just say police. This and their plaid clothes led me to believe that they're federal agents. I open my door. I say, "Is there a problem, officer?" And one of the agents looks at my front door and says, in a perfectly professional manner, "What's the family name on the apartment?" I replied and he says, "Do you know the people upstairs?" I said no, but they moved in 5 months ago. He said okay, then proceeded to go upstairs with the other officers. I go back to my apartment and lie down in my bed. After a few minutes I hear footsteps coming from back down the stairs and the officer says, "Let's check out the basement." Nothing come with this either. In the following days and weeks, I noticed that the man from the 3rd floor hasn't showed up in a while. I never really saw him coming or going, and generally saw or heard the woman coming home, but he completely disappeared. I might also add that these people did not work, as my girlfriend lived with me and heard them during the day, being rather strange. Now one night at around 11:30 PM, the woman comes home and does not have a key. She then proceeds to stand outside shrieking. Someone eventually come down to let her in. Now 2 or 3 nights later, this repeats, only she shrieks so long that somebody else in the neighbourhood called the police. Now this must have been the 4th or 3rd time that the police have been called in only 3 or 4 months of her living there. People wonder why I didn't let her in. Well, it's a rough neighbourhood and I don't open the door to people I don't know. 2, I'm not her babysitter. She should remember her key. Maybe I'd let her in if she wasn't horrible, but I felt in no way obliged to because of how crazy she is. So one day I returned home after work and noticed dents in the doorknob and that one of the windows broken on the front door. This idiot obviously forgot her key and took drastic measures to get in. I called maintenance and they showed up to fix it. So on one Saturday, I was getting ready to take a shower and heard the window on the front door break in. I normally minded my own business, but I had been listening to this woman's crap for 5 months now and was fed up. Not to mention that I'm not going to sit by while she damages property. I open my front door and ask through the window what's going on. "I don't have a key. The landlord changed our locks." She replied, "Gee, I wonder why." So I let her in. just to stop the noise and to further comfort her. However, she was very apologetic and non-confrontational. It somewhat disarmed me, not to mention she was only like 5'2". I said, "Did your boyfriend have a key?" "I don't have one," she said, which was lying. I told her that other people have to live here too, you know, don't do that stuff again. And she went back. Fast forward to the summer. This woman has been in the home for 6 months. Everything she's doing is unbearable. It's driving us both insane. So my girlfriend, home alone at this point because she is very pregnant, was afraid of this woman. I wasn't as worried as I had a licensed .45 caliber handgun in my home, but I was still worried if my girlfriend would have to use it. So she calls me when I'm at work and says there's 3 people, a baby and a dog, on the stairs outside of our door, just hanging around being very loud. I told her not to worry and I'll be back soon. When I arrive, there was no third person or dog. It was a woman with a baby and a skinny, shady looking guy with braids. However, they weren't making any noise, so I didn't say anything to them. I reassured my girlfriend that if they made sound, I go out and tell them that they've got to be quiet. About an hour or so passes and I hear a police radio in the side yard. I look out and sure as hell, there's a cop outside. I then look out my window and see 4 or 5 cruisers and about 8 officers outside. What the hell is going on? I walk out and on my way out I notice that the people who were on the stairs are gone. I want to know what's happening, so I go up to one of the policemen. He says, "What floor do you live on?" I tell him the 1st. He responds, "We're interested in the people on the 3rd floor." I go back inside and I hear the cops going upstairs and questioning this crazy woman on the 3rd floor, to which she responds by denying any knowledge of what's happening. The officers look around the home more. While this is happening, I bring my girlfriend out to the street where a news crew and crowd of neighbours had begun to gather. I wanted to get out of the home in case a bullet started flying. Now, while unlikely, the erratic behaviour that this woman had consistently exhibited shows that she's not all there and we don't know what she's capable of. After the cops come out and look defeated, I notice a woman who was on the stairs was standing outside of the home like an inspector. I go back in the home and notice that the laundry room door is shut. It never is. I was confused at this and I went to tug on the handle. It was like somebody was holding on it from the other side. I went straight back out and told the cops that I think this guy's in the laundry room. Minutes later, the cops knock the door handle off and pull him out at gunpoint. The chick upstairs has terrorised the neighbourhood for months and I'm not about to cover up her or any of her friends' actions. The cops tore up the laundry room in the process and left a massive mess there. As I was talking to one of the arresting officers, the cool guy from the 2nd floor comes home with a what the hell look on his face, and I told him what he's just missed. My lease actually ended a week after and my girlfriend and I moved out.
More than a few years ago, I was working as a burlesque entertainer in a gentleman's club, and I was idly sitting at the end of a bar one night when a couple came in. Not unusual. I had no contact with them and thought nothing of them being there, until later. A few days after that night, the doorman handed me a piece of paper that had 2 names and phone numbers written on it, Laura and Richard. I was supposed to call one of them, so I called Laura, who told me they were the couple who'd been at the bar the other night, and had noticed me and thought I'd be a perfect part in a movie Richard was producing. Would I be up for a meeting? Of course I would, who wouldn't? I was told Richard would pick me up the next night at 7, and to wear something wild. 7 o'clock came the next evening, and I was ready in a white lace dress with ostrich feather trim, when Richard showed up outside my building, so I went down, introduced myself, and got in the car. We agreed to go to a local bar I knew well for the meeting, but first we had to go back to his place so he could pick up some contracts he'd forgotten, so off we went. He went into the house and came back out with a few manila envelopes and an open bottle of beer, a brand that I didn't drink. Plus, it's against the law to drink alcohol in a vehicle here. So I stuck the beer into the window well of his Jeep and we went to the bar. At the bar he showed me what were supposedly scripts from the movie he was producing and some contracts, and it looked pretty legit. Richard was very nice and I was interested. I made some plans to go out later with my soon-to-be boyfriend, so I excused myself to call him on the bar's payphone and took my Corona that I'd ordered at the bar with me to the bank of phones. As a dancer, I had been taught by the older girls to never let your drink out of your sight. My boyfriend wanted to get going to another club, so I went back to the table where Richard was and told him I had to go. He didn't like that and tried a few different things to get me to go to the movie set with him, saying I could meet Mickey Rourke and check out the set. But what I really wanted to do was meet my boyfriend, so I declined, took Richard's card and left. I never heard from Richard again, but a couple of months later the police came around to the bar I was working at. They had 2 big books of mugshots and stacks of Polaroids with them, and they wanted to talk to all of us about a predator couple who had been setting up meetings with dancers by saying they were in the film industry, then drugging and doing horrible things to them. They showed me 2 mugshot books and asked if I saw anyone I recognised in the pictures, and I immediately identified Richard and Laura. Then they showed me Polaroids, which were trophy pictures of the couple in the acts of attacking poor drug girls, and asking if I knew any of the victims or where they might find them, in order to talk to the girls. I only knew a couple of the women in the photographs, but there were a lot that this happened to. Richard and Laura were prosecuted. He went to jail, but she didn't, because she was from a wealthy family and she also turned witness on him. About 12 years after Richard was convicted, I saw in the newspaper that he was up for a possibility of parole, so I wrote a letter to the parole board telling the story and urged them not to let him back out, because he's a dangerous offender who should have to stay in prison for the entirety of his sentence. If I'd drank that open beer he handed me in the Jeep on the way to the meeting, I wouldn't have made it to the meeting, and probably would have ended up in that stack of Polaroids. Girls and guys, always keep your eye on your drinks. Have fun and be careful out there.
The high school I attended was relatively small, maybe around 150 students back then. The dorm was even smaller, around 18 people, and it wasn't long before I found out that I would be rooming with Jacob for my first semester of 10th grade, something we were both hoping for since summer. Not long after arriving, we met the other new students, and we of course hazed by the old ones. During those first couple of months, the new kids stuck together, both in the dorm and at school. This is how I become friends with Harrison. Harrison was a big Chinese kid who was 1 grade below me. He was in Jacob's class. He was one of the funniest people that I'd ever met, and he was just an all-round nice guy. We would hang out all the time during school hours, and it really felt like I got to know him well as every week passed. He was the type of kid you'd associate the word weeb with. An anime-loving, Japanese word spouting, weird collection type guy. Once, I went to his house, which was about 3 hours away from school, because I needed to catch a train from that particular town. Our friendship didn't last long, however, and it had nothing to do with him. I just made other friends and I had more things in common with them. I would occasionally say hi to Harrison if I passed him in school, but I never really talked to him in the dorm anymore. So my 9th grade year passed and Jacob and I become even closer friends. And in 11th grade, Mason joined our friend group. Although none of us talked to Harrison, we started to notice that he had become a lot more sluggish and depressed. Harrison's roommate would tell us how he would never clear up after himself. Harrison would sleep on top of his dirty laundry and not flush the bathroom, something that caused a lot of problems with his other 3 bathroom buddies. Our dorm parents started having problems with Harrison. He wouldn't show up for dinner, he'd often be late to school, and he would never listen to authority. At one point, Harrison left the dorm for just a little while to be with his family. Senior year, and everything was much of the same with Harrison, until one Pacific night that got everybody in the school talking. Jacob, Mason, and I were hanging out with our dorm mum when our dorm dad come in. He had a weird look on his face. "Where's Harrison?" he said. quietly but clearly worried. We told him that we didn't know. He stared at the ground for a moment and said, "Stay with my wife." And with that, he hurriedly went outside. Now about 20 minutes passed before he come back to the dorm. He looked very serious, which was unusual for him. After thinking for a second, he sat back down with the three of us and explained a little bit of what happened. He went on to tell us that Harrison is dangerous. He needed to be found. He told us to stay with his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and to tackle Harrison if he ever entered the kitchen. Now, up until that point, we didn't know what was going on, but knew enough to stay up with our dorm mum. It must have been 11 PM when we saw Harrison enter the dorm. We all watched him as he went into his dorm, then out again. Our dorm mum was calling our husband quietly as we observed. About 5 minutes later, our dorm dad and the girls' dorm dad, the dorm administrator and superintendent all rushed into Harrison's room. I stayed sitting next to our dorm mum, holding her hand as she quietly told us not to tell anyone at school. Jason, Mason, and I started talking amongst ourselves. We had no idea what this guy was doing or what was happening. All we knew is that Harrison was depressed and he was unhygienic. We then eventually went to bed after my dorm mum had calmed down. The following night, our dorm dad had a meeting. He didn't really tell us anything. He thought for a second and then said that Harrison wouldn't be returning. He also told us not to tell anybody at school. Everyone in high school was talking about it the next week though. Harrison was eventually returned to school a month after the incident. He wasn't allowed into our dorm. His parents rented an apartment near school. I didn't see much of him after that. I eventually graduated. Now, I moved to the city where Jacob's family lived, so I kept in touch with him all the time. I wish the story ended there, but it didn't. It took a much more sinister turn. One morning, I get a call from Jacob's dad. He wanted to talk about something with me. Something that happened to Jacob. He told me that ever since the incident, the school administration had taken a closer look at Harrison's situation, eventually deciding to search and clear his phone and laptop. They found over 200 pictures of Jacob alone on his phone, with some other disturbing images. Plus, they weren't pictures that were taken off of Jacob's Facebook. These were pictures that Harrison had secretly taken. The weird thing was that Harrison never seemed to talk to Jacob, as Jacob himself related to me afterwards, so Jacob, Mason and myself never suspected a thing. Harrison got put into questioning. He confessed that he constantly fantasized about murdering Jacob. It wasn't just murder, he planned on slowly torturing him, describing the torture in the really nasty graphic ways that you only see in horror films. Harrison had actually wrote about it hundreds of times in his notebook. Taking pictures of Jacob was apparently the way he'd fuel his imagination. I believe the night the three of us stayed by our dorm, and our dorm mum, was the night that he was going to carry out the murder. Now, I never got informed of the exact reason why they didn't let him back in school after that, but he was immediately expelled when they found out about the murder plot. Harrison had gone mad. Nobody realised, or at least we didn't make the connection. Jacob was in shock. He told me that Harrison planned to murder him because he felt Jacob was the dorm dad's favourite. Harrison had such a messed up mind that he thought he would become the favourite if he killed Jacob. I understand that Harrison's parents might not have been the best parents in the world, but in no way does that justify how deranged and messed up this kid was. Jacob, Mason and I were all very close to our dorm mum and dad. What if he had seen the three of us as potential targets? I was so relieved that he got expelled and that nothing nasty ever come of it.
Not really sure how to begin this, but my title may make more sense after reading my experience. I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. Summer of 2004, My family was supposed to vacation in Kennebunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mum wanted to drive up, super annoying to me at the time, but we didn't have a choice, and my brother, sister and I loaded into the car and started the drive. I was about 14 at the time. The drive was uneventful, but there were various delays, and we ended up getting in a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them and get the keys. Sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick the keys up. My mum, unfazed, decided she wanted lobster, so we went to one of our favourite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make us reservations at a hotel in Kennebunkport from New York City while we ate. We were enjoying the lobster while a guy came up to us and started chatting with my mum. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation. During this, my dad calls my mum and my mum excused herself to speak to him. Apparently all the hotels were booked for the night. Go figure, higher vacation season in Kennebunkport. The plan was for us to drive up to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we could pick up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently the local had been listening to my mum's conversation and come back over once you got off the phone. I want to say, there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was pretty clean cut and unassuming. He told my mum he had a big home and a big guest house, and we were more than welcome to stay and his wife wouldn't mind. Immediately my reaction was, F that. Nowhere in the world was I staying at a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. No offense to anyone from Maine, but the streets get creepy. My mum, doing her due diligence, determined this guy was legit, said he was in finance. My mum was an investment banker, and they chatted enough for my mum to determine he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical. He said that I was overreacting, and that I needed to get out of the city more and accept that sometimes people are just nice. So my brother, sister and I got into our car and followed him back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle, centered, imagine a symmetrical room layout, they were right under the window in each room. Just seemed out of place. Anyway, fast forward, we're all getting ready to go to bed. My mum hears a knock at the door and it's the guy. He said he just wanted to check to make sure we got settled in. Cool, nice thing to do. About 30 minutes later he comes back to check in again. At this point my mum was like, thanks, we're good. We will stop by the house in the morning to say thank you, etc. Fast forward another 30 or 45 minutes. I can't sleep. I'm terrified. We hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere around the trees or close proximity to the bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mum wide awake and look up at the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up, there was a male figure, just standing. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he was there for. When we walked away, my mum waited for a bit and then told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much flipping out at my mum about something, but I didn't hear what. My mum said she was going to put stuff into the car and to follow her out. This was around 2 AM. When we got to the car, we pulled around to the front of the house, so my mum could return the key and say thanks and get the hell out of there. However, when we got to the front, all the lights were off. Not just all the lights, but it looked like no one had been home. Porch light, table light in the front windows, everything black. Also, the 2 cars were gone. The local's car and what we would presume was his wife's car. After seeing this, my mum at this point, pretty unsettled, said we were leaving and we proceeded to drive out the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been dead bolted and padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad said rev it, we were in a big SUV, and just get the hell out of there. We drove straight back to New York City, not speaking the entire time. We had never returned back to Maine, and my parents refused to speak about it. I asked a family member about it one night when he was drunk, and all he said was, they didn't tell you. The actual owners of that house were on vacation. I'm assuming my mum and dad followed up with the local authorities and figured that out, but never told us. I don't know who that man was or what they planned that evening. I was curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers who lived in the area at the time, whether travelling through, etc. Sorry for the long post, just trying to be thorough. Hi everyone. I spoke with my mum and dad. They didn't have a ton of details, and frankly didn't want to talk about it, but here's what they said. My mum first apologised because she knows it's a bad situation and thinks she's a horrible mum. She's not, she's awesome. She didn't have a ton of details, but here are the high-level items. I asked her what made her suspect something was wrong, or what made her put her guard up. I knew something was up when she told us all to sleep in the same bed. Essentially, she said given it was dark, and the longer the night went on, she realised it wasn't a great situation, and she shouldn't have agreed to it. However, the point when things turned, so to say, is when the guy came by the second time. My mum said his demeanour had done 180 degrees. When he came back by to check in for the second time, she felt something was off. She described it as somewhat of an edge, both in his attitude and tone of voice. She said he seemed annoyed and anxious, but was trying to come across as a concerned host, if that makes sense. She also said he looked back at the main house a few times, and wasn't really paying attention to her when she was saying yes, everything's fine, thank you again, etc, etc. All of those signs put together made her realise something was off. The way she described it was there was something beneath his exterior that was coming out, that I got a glimpse of, and I didn't like it. With respect to the home, and this will probably be relevant to the locals from around the area, and will lead to my next point, she said it seemed like it was being renovated. This might explain why it was unoccupied. She said when she drove in at first, she was just happy we found a place to settle in for the night after a long drive, so she wasn't paying attention to everything as she should have. However, when we were leaving, since she was more on edge and everything was heightened, she started to notice a few things. First, she said it looked like the main house was definitely going through renovations or something like that the exteriors were not that great, and what she saw didn't jive with how the guy described it initially. Neither she nor my father called the cops. She said in hindsight she probably should have, but she was primarily concerned about getting out of there, and after she did, she began to rationalise it away, like, come on, it's dark, you're freaking yourself out, calm down, you're tired, it can't possibly be anything bad, you need to lay off the scary movies, type of thought pattern. It was until a period of time after that she realised she probably should have alerted the authorities. Also, this is a point I don't remember. Apparently the home was a lot further down than she was led to believe it was going to be. This makes me think maybe it was not the main part of town. I'm not great with geography, and at 14 years old was definitely not great with it. And she didn't remember exactly where it was. She said she tried, but was focusing on following him, and wasn't paying attention to the streets exactly. She apologised, again told me don't do that when you have kids. With respect to what my cousin told me about the owners being on vacation, my dad said, "Your cousin is drunk." Okay, that being besides the point, I pressed him a little bit. Apparently, how my cousin walked away with the idea is because when my aunt and uncle and mum and dad were talking about it one night, I guess someone floated the idea that maybe the owners were on vacation and this person was house sitting for them. However, my mum and dad believed that the house was either being renovated or the owners weren't there. For whatever reason, it was just vacant. I'm not sure these answers really answer anything, and frankly they make me feel worse about the whole situation than I did before. I think my parents felt horrible and extremely guilty, and still do, and just tried to bury this and move on.
I work at a popular shoe store in a mall. The city is a bit sketchy, and the mall doesn't get a lot of funding, so it's very small, and most of the people that come into the shoe store are just bored teenagers. Since we mainly sell popular name brand shoes, Jordan, Nike, Adidas mostly, we get some die-hard sneakerheads every now and then. I'm used to the usual comments like, "Your brother must have taught you about the shoes, huh?" And people asking me for a male employee to help them instead. I guess people aren't used to girls liking shoes too. Anyway, this guy come in with his kid, we're a little busy. The first thing he said to me was, "Wow, they let girls do this kind of work now?" Okay, didn't really know what he meant by that, but whatever. I said what is he looking for, if I could help him with a size, the usual. He was looking for shoes for his son, who was probably about 6 or so at the time. The dad had to be in his late 30s at least. He asked me for a couple of different colours of one shoe. I told him that I'd be just a second grabbing them and went back. He responded, "That's right, sweetheart, take your time." I was raised in the South, so I didn't think too much about sweetheart. But since he was much older, that was very weird. I didn't live in the South anymore, and he definitely didn't have a Southern accent. I just figured he was kind of weird. I decided to make him leave as quickly as possible by helping him as fast as possible. When I come back out with the shoebox and tried to hand them to the guy, he put his hands over mine instead of taking the shoes and said, "Wow, you're beautiful, just gorgeous." I just politely smiled, not wanting to be rude, and said thank you. "Here are the colours you're looking for," and pushed the boxes towards him. "What's your name, honey?" he said. That's when I started to feel more weird and creeped out. I'm underaged, and often being told that I look far younger than I actually am. I really don't know why this dude was hitting on me. He's older than my dad is. I told him my first name and pointed to my name tag. "If you need any more help, just ask any one of the associates," I said, smiling, and left to help the other customers. While I was helping a group of people that come in, he whistled at me from the other side of the store. I glanced at him for a second, but it was very obvious I was talking to somebody else, and my other co-workers were closer to him. He walked over saying, "Hey, you disappeared on me." He asked for a different shoe, randomly selecting from the wall. He pointed at his son. He said he wanted this one. He can be so picky. Laughing. I looked over at the kid who didn't seem interested in any shoes. He was just playing with a toy. The dad did this a few times with different shoes, though we do sell out of some sizes and we didn't have the size he needed for some shoes. He kept on picking new shoes, even if we had the ones he wanted in size, saying that his kid had asked for them. When I brought one of the pairs out to him, he said, "How old are you?" 16, I said, picking up the shoes he wasn't buying. 16? You gotta be kidding me. I honestly thought you were about 4 years younger. "You're lying, 16, really?" he said to me. "Yep, 16, I responded. I went to the back room to put the boxes away and asked my co-workers to help the guy out over the mic. They responded that he wouldn't talk to them. He kept waiting for me to come back. I noticed that we had one of the shoes he asked for in the same size, tucked away where I didn't see it before. Hoping this would get him to buy the shoe and leave, I brought it out saying, "I found one last size. It's your son's one." He jumped up saying, "Oh my god, I could kiss you," and opened his arms like he wanted a hug. I just stepped away saying that one of the associates could help him. He said, "You're getting a big tip today." He then just kind of sat there and watched with his kid for a while, repeating that every time I walked by it. He also asked when my shift was over, but I told him I was covering for somebody else and didn't know. When he finally did check out, he come up to me saying, "Here, take this," and shoveled 2 crumpled up $5 at me. I told him I couldn't accept it, but he said, "You can take it, just take it," and shoved it into my hand. I joked with my co-workers about how creepy he was, and my shift went back to normal for a while. But then I noticed him walking outside of the store again, looking in. I immediately went into the back room and asked my co-workers to tell me when he'd left. He paced back and forth in front of the store for about 4 more hours, and I didn't see him with his kid at all now. He was just staring in, not saying anything. If I was out on the floor, my co-workers would tell me over the mic that he was coming back, and I'd go back into the room. When my shift was over, I left through the employee exit. I don't know how much longer he paced in front of the store, but luckily I haven't seen him again since. I work at a popular shoe store in a mall. The city is a bit sketchy and the mall doesn't get a lot of funding, so it's very small, and most of the people that come into the shoe store are just bored teenagers. Since we mainly sell popular name brand shoes, Jordan, Nike, Adidas mostly, we get some die-hard sneakerheads every now and then. I'm used to the usual comments like, "Your brother must have taught you about the shoes, huh?" And people asking me for a male employee to help them instead. I guess people aren't used to girls liking shoes too. Anyway, this guy come in with his kid. We're a little busy. The first thing he said to me was, "Wow, they let girls do this kind of work now?" Okay, didn't really know what he meant by that, but whatever. I said, what is he looking for? If I could help him with a size, the usual. He was looking for shoes for his son, who was probably about 6 or so at the time. The dad had to be in his late 30s at least. He asked me for a couple of different colours of one shoe. I told him that I'd be just a second grabbing them and went back. He responded, "That's right, sweetheart, take your time." I was raised in the South, so I didn't think too much about sweetheart. But since he was much older, that was very weird. I didn't live in the South anymore, and he definitely didn't have a Southern accent. I just figured he was kind of weird. I decided to make him leave as quickly as possible by helping him as fast as possible. When I come back out with the shoebox and tried to hand them to the guy, he put his hands over mine instead of taking the shoes and said, "Wow, you're beautiful, just gorgeous." I just politely smiled, not wanting to be rude, and said thank you. "Here are the colours you're looking for," and pushed the boxes towards him. "What's your name, honey?" he said. That's when I started to feel more weird and creeped out. I'm underaged, and often being told that I look far younger than I actually am. I really don't know why this dude was hitting on me. He's older than my dad is. I told him my first name and pointed to my name tag. "If you need any more help, just ask any one of the associates," I said, smiling, and left to help the other customers. While I was helping a group of people that come in, he whistled at me from the other side of the store. I glanced at him for a second, but it was very obvious that I was talking to somebody else, and my other co-workers were closer to him. He walked over saying, "Hey, you disappeared on me." He asked for a different shoe, randomly selecting from the wall. He pointed at his son. He said he wanted this one. He can be so picky. Laughing. I looked over at the kid, who didn't seem interested in any shoes. He was just playing with a toy. The dad did this a few times with different shoes, though we do sell out of some sizes and we didn't have the size he needed for some shoes. He kept on picking new shoes, even if we had the ones he wanted in size, saying that his kid had asked for them. When I brought one of the pairs out to him, he said, "How old are you?" 16, I said, picking up the shoes he wasn't buying. 16? You gotta be kidding me. I honestly thought you were about 4 years younger. "You're lying, 16, really?" he said to me. "Yep, 16, I responded. I went to the back room to put the boxes away and asked my co-workers to help the guy out over the mic. They responded that he wouldn't talk to them. He kept waiting for me to come back. I noticed that we had one of the shoes he asked for in the same size, tucked away where I didn't see it before. Hoping this would get him to buy the shoe and leave, I brought it out saying, "I found one last size. It's your son's one." He jumped up saying, "Oh my god, I could kiss you," and opened his arms like he wanted a hug. I just stepped away saying that one of the associates could help him. He said, "You're getting a big tip today." He then just kind of sat there and watched with his kid for a while, repeating that every time I walked by it. He also asked when my shift was over, but I told him I was covering for somebody else and didn't know. When he finally did check out, he come up to me saying, "Here, take this," and shoveled 2 crumpled up 5 bills at me. I told him I couldn't accept it, but he said, "You can take it, just take it," and shoved it into my hand. I joked with my co-workers about how creepy he was, and my shift went back to normal for a while. But then I noticed him walking outside of the store again, looking in. I immediately went into the back room and asked my co-workers to tell me when he'd left. He paced back and forth in front of the store for about 4 more hours, and I didn't see him with his kid at all now, He was just staring in, not saying anything. If I was out on the floor, my co-workers would tell me over the mic that he was coming back, and I'd go back into the room. When my shift was over, I left through the employee exit. I don't know how much longer he paced in front of the store, but luckily I haven't seen him again since.
Okay, so this happened in Maine when I was about 3 years old, almost 4. I was at the beach with my mum. We went as a group with some other stay-at-home mums and their kids. It was a fairly hot and crowded day there. I found myself playing with the other kids at the edge of the water. For some reason, I strayed away a bit, and that's when a middle-aged woman started talking to me. I remember her very clearly. She looked like a mother would, with a one-piece black bathing suit, cargo shorts, sunglasses, and her hair pulled up in a bun. She asked me what games I like to play and what my favourite candy was. As soon as I told her, she told me she had some in her car and persuaded me to come with her. Yeah, I know, I was quite a naive child. She was cheerful and enthusiastic, taking my hand and leading me away through the crowded beach. I skipped alongside her and had no fear whatsoever. Then, thank my lucky stars, my mum spotted me in the distance and started screaming my name at the top of her lungs and jumping up and down while waving her arms. The woman immediately let go and darted away. I stood there, terribly confused, until my mum got me. I get chills thinking about it now. She seemed so nice at the time, though I admit I was way too trusting. It stinks of an attempted kidnapping now. If my mum hadn't spotted me, who knows where I would be, or if I would even be alive.
When I was in middle school, I took the city bus to school because my parents couldn't drive me and no school buses routed to my neighbourhood. I didn't live in a particularly good place, but I never felt unsafe. That morning, I got on the bus to go to school, 6th grade at that time, so I was about 12. But let me tell you, I've always looked a lot younger than my actual age. It was decently crowded, so I go to my usual spot at the back. A few stops go by, and then a man gets on and sits right next to me. It's been about 10 years now, and I still remember him well. Tall, thin, Hispanic, with long straight black hair. There was maybe 1 or 2 seats open, so it wasn't that weird that he sat next to me at first. I just figured that he sat in the first seat that he saw open. He then started talking to me. I can't remember what he said at first. It was early in the morning though, and I was already annoyed that I had to share my space with him. I just made fake noises like I was agreeing. Then he asked me where I was going. That's when my spidey senses started to tingle, because obviously it's early in the morning and I'm a child, so I am going to school. So I said, school, in a kind of way. I realise now that he was probably looking for me to tell him which school. A few stops went by and the bus opened up more quickly, so I went and found another empty seat. Not 5 minutes later, he follows and sits right next to me again and still tries to get me to talk to him. He wants to know my name. I then look towards the front of the bus and see 8th graders that I knew from school and who were riding the bus too. My animal brain screams at me to go and find them and be safe. I move up to the front of the bus and planted myself in the middle of them and basically pressed myself into them, giving them help me eyes. The guy starts looking around and moves again. He sits directly in front of me. He asks my name, and one of the boys I'm sitting with, G, quickly calls me by a fake name and turns his body so he's kind of in between us and carries on a conversation with me until we get to school. The group of 8th graders basically formed a circle around me and huddled me off the bus. I turned to make sure the creeper didn't follow me. Thankfully he didn't. I actually had to get the bus earlier after that. And since the bus stop was right in front of my school, I was afraid that he would know what school I went to, but luckily I never saw him again. I'm just thankful for those kids that helped me out. I don't know if that guy might have thought I was younger than I actually looked, and thought I was young and stupid enough to trust him. But the thought of this scares me.